Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and today I want to show you how I built these large nightstands slash small dressers. So the deal with these is that my mom recently found a matching bedroom set that she liked, so she bought the bed and the dresser, but the nightstands that came with it were just too small for what she needed. So she recruited me to build her 2 matching nightstands to the existing bed and dresser, but that were the actual size that she needed. Now, I took a little liberty here and modified the design slightly so it's not an exact match. I will show you the original bed and the dresser here in just a minute so you can see how well you think that they match. But if you are not matching anything, these are obviously a really cool standalone piece. I've got the printable building plans linked in the video description below, but if you're ready to see how they all came together, let's go. This build is very similar to most other dresser builds that I've shared before, but the defining feature of this particular design is all the trim that I added to try to tie it into the existing dresser and this bed. These were the pieces that I was building to match, so when I looked at the existing dresser, I noticed the cove around the top, the half round under the top drawer, and the details on the drawer fronts. These were all details that I pulled from. With that said, let's dive into building the frame. So instead of adding those large decorative pieces along the bottom, I decided to build these with 4 legs. I personally just like this design better than solid pieces going all the way to the floor. So to start this project off, I cut some 2x2s from some 2x6 material that I had in the shop already. You can certainly use pre-cut 2x2s to build with, but if you've followed along for very long, you know that I prefer to cut my own 2x2s. I simply ripped 1.5 inch square pieces, then trimmed them to final length for the legs. For the side panels, I cut down a strip of 3/4 inch plywood using my circular saw and Craig rip cut, and then I trimmed them to length on the miter saw. For the rest of the frame, I cut 1x3s and 1x2s to length. You can find all of the specifics, the dimensions, and measurements in the plans linked in the video description. Once I had 4 legs, 2 side panels, 5 1x3s, and 1 1x2 cut to size for the frame, I sanded everything smooth. I assembled this frame using pocket holes and screws, and I know some people hate them and some people love them, so if you hate them, feel free to assemble your project whatever way that you prefer. I drilled 3/4 inch pocket holes along the edges of both side panels and into the ends of the 1x3s and the 1x2. Once all the holes were drilled, I used pocket hole screws to attach the side panels between 2 2x2 legs so that it was flush along the inside edge. I did this twice to make 2 side panels. Then I installed the 1x3s between them, 2 at the top and 2 even with the bottom of the plywood panel. Okay, so I drilled my pocket holes maybe a little bit too close to the edge here. So it's actually causing these 2x2s to split a little bit when I drive them. So what I did up here at the top when I noticed that start happening is I clamped across it to keep the wood kind of like together to keep it from splitting so I can drive the screws all the way in. These are 1x3s, so I should have used the pocket hole settings for the 1x3s, but I used the one for the 1x4s, so they're a little bit too far apart, too close to the edge, and that's why that's causing that problem. So that's what I'm doing to solve it. Not a big deal, just FYI, don't drill your pocket holes this close to the edge of the board. Now you may be wondering about the last 1x3 and the random 1x2 piece that I cut earlier, and these are the drawer dividers. So once the main frame was together, I installed these to separate the 3 drawers. Dividers on drawers aren't necessary, this is purely for design. The original dresser that I was matching had a thicker piece under the top drawer and a thinner piece separating the bottom drawers. So I did that too, and I added the 1x2 vertically under the top drawer and the last 1x3 horizontally between the 2 bottom drawers. The spacing that I used here is detailed in the plans linked in the video description, but really you can space these however you'd like to create whatever size drawers that you need. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. Just make sure that whatever spacing that you do use, you keep it consistent on both sides as you attach these dividers. Then I added the drawer slides. Now if you guys know me, you know that drawers are my favorite, so I quite enjoy this part. I used 14-inch drawer slides here, and I removed them from the packaging and made sure to get the screws out, then toss the instructions because who needs those? But if you want a super detailed guide on how I install my drawer slides, be sure to check out the drawer building guide that I've linked in the video description. I installed these slides so that the bottom of each slide was flush to the divider below it, and so that it was 1.5-inch inset from the front edge of the dresser or nightstand, whatever we're calling this. This will allow for inset drawer fronts later. Then I did all of this twice so that I ended up with 2 matching nightstands that were now ready for drawers. I pulled out some more 3/4-inch plywood and ripped down some strips to cut the drawer boxes and drawer fronts from. And again, all of the dimensions and measurements can be found in the plans, but I trimmed the drawer pieces to length on the miter saw until I had everything that I needed to build 2 deep and 1 shallow drawer box for each nightstand. I cut 1/4-inch dados into the sides of these pieces to install the 1/4-inch plywood drawer bottoms. Now, if you don't want to cut dados, you can certainly just glue and staple the bottom of the drawer onto the box. However, I like to cut these dados, so I adjusted my blade height to about 1/4-inch high and ran the pieces through once. Then I adjusted the fence back just a little and cut another line. Then I adjusted it back once more and cut out the middle. If you have a dado blade and want to use it, it'll save a little time. I have one, but I rarely bother swapping it out for just a few drawers. Anyway, once my dados were cut, I applied iron-on edge banding to the tops of each piece. This is totally optional, but I do think that it makes the drawer boxes look a little cleaner with smooth edges, so I like to add it. I've got a complete guide to applying iron-on edge banding linked in the video description. I sanded all the pieces well, then drilled 3/4-inch pocket holes into the ends of the front and back pieces of the drawer boxes to assemble them. I assembled each box using pocket hole screws and cut and slid in a 1/4-inch plywood bottom panel into the dados before adding the 4th side. Each nightstand got 2 large drawers and 1 shallow drawer box. I installed these onto the slides using 1/4-inch plywood scrap strips to space them up off the dividers a little so that they're not rubbing as they slide in and out. For more information on installing drawer slides, check out my detailed drawer building guide linked in the video description. Once the drawers were installed, I moved on to the drawer fronts. Now, the drawer fronts were actually one of the more time-consuming parts of this entire build, just because there was so much trim to apply. I cut each drawer front to size from 3/4-inch plywood, then I added 1.5-inch wide lattice trim along the edges. I mitered the corners 45 degrees and used some quick-dry wood glue to attach them. Regular wood glue would work fine for this. I just tried the quick dry wood glue for this part, and I actually switched back over to regular wood glue for the next parts. So anyway, please forgive me for this camera angle. I did not realize that it was so bad and you couldn't hardly see anything until I had already built the entire thing and I went to start editing the footage. So sorry about that. But once the lattice trim was dry, I cut 1/4-inch square dowels to make a rectangle inside the lattice trim. I used wood glue and painter's tape to attach these tiny pieces onto the 2 large drawer fronts. I didn't add this detail to the top smaller drawer front as it was already so small it was hard to fit. Then finally, I cut and glued some half-round molding on top of the lattice trim. I mitered the corners and attached these pieces on all of the drawer fronts so that it was about a 1/4 inch inset from the outside edge. This was definitely not a difficult process, just very time consuming with all of the little pieces. While I allowed the glue to dry on the drawer front trim, I moved on to adding some additional trim details on the nightstand. To make the sides look a little more finished, I cut and glued some 1x3 pieces at the top and the bottom. Then I added a 1x2 piece, even with the 1x2 drawer divider on the front. And I did this for both sides of the nightstand. I mentioned earlier that when I was looking at the original dresser, I noticed some cove molding and half-round molding above and below the top drawer. So I added the same here. I cut to fit half-round molding with mitered ends around the front and sides along the middle of the 1x2 pieces. I used wood glue and these Rockler bandy clamps on the front, but just used wood glue and brad nails on the sides. I repeated the same to add cove molding around the top edge as well. Then I puttied and sanded over all of the corners and the nail holes to prep it for paint. By this time, the drawer fronts were ready to install, and I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel here. I used wood screws through the inside of the drawer box to install each drawer front. And I know there are a lot of tricks for spacing, but honestly I find that eyeballing it and just holding it in place while screwing from the inside is the quickest and easiest way to do it. So that's what I did here. I started at the top and worked my way down, removing each drawer as I went so that I could access the one below it. And at this point, it was ready for paint. So a couple of projects ago, I built a sliding door console, and in that video, I snapped my fingers and suddenly the project is painted. And that's what we're doing again here because I still hate painting. I don't want to film that process. All I did was use a brush and a roller, put a coat of primer on, and then put 2 coats of paint. The paint was a color match that my mom got to match her dresser and her bed. Now, I didn't take great pains to make this paint job super perfect because I'm gonna go back with some sandpaper and like scuff this up a little bit. The bed and the dresser that she bought has like that, like, I don't know the word for it, where you just like sand spots so the wood shows through. Anyway, that's what I'm doing here. So I didn't take great pains to make this very perfect because I'm gonna go back and like scuff up some spots. So anyway, let's move on. Once these were painted, the final part was adding the top. Now I cut the tops from 3/4 inch plywood and applied edge banding to the front and the sides. And again, that's optional. I just think it looks a little cleaner. Then I applied some stain. I used a combination of Minwax Early American and Minwax Weathered Oak. And I don't really know that adding the weathered oak made any difference, but in my mind it did just a little. I debated on how I wanted to attach these, and there are several options. So the top here is plywood, so wood movement isn't really that big of a deal. However, I didn't want to drill any more like pocket holes in here. Since I already had the trim on, it was going to be hard to clamp, and anyway, to just make things a little easier, I'm just going to use the figure 8 tabs. These are typically to allow for wood movement. Wood movement isn't a concern here, so these really aren't like necessary. If you wanted to use a different way to attach the tops, I'm just going to use these because I've got them, and it'll be pretty quick. But you could also use like corner brackets, like L brackets, I guess you could call them, pocket holes, whatever. The plywood's not gonna crack or split, so this is just one way to attach the tops. Since I had these figure 8 brackets on hand already, that's what I used to attach the top. However, if I had some corner brackets, I would probably have used those instead. I just didn't want to run to town to go get any. Once the brackets were secured to the frame, I flipped the whole assembly upside down on the top and screwed the brackets to the top panel. Make sure to use 5/8 inch screws so that they don't poke through at the top. Then I flipped it back over, reinstalled the drawers, added some knobs, and gave the top a few coats of clear poly. You know, all of those final little details. And in case you're wondering, I have kind of a pet peeve about adding back panels on dressers and things with drawers, so I didn't add one to this. However, if you wanted to, feel free to go for it. And now it was ready to deliver to my parents. I used a sanding block with 120 grit on the drawer front and on some of the edges to scuff up the paint a little bit. All in all, I'm really happy with how these turned out and honestly a little surprised that they tie in so well. I hope you enjoyed watching this project come together, and if you'd like to build your own, don't forget to grab the plans linked below. I have tons more building projects planned for the new year, so be sure to hit that subscribe button and follow along so you don't miss them. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!